Hey, beautiful nerds. Thank you for tuning in to the High Fantasy Podcast. This is your co-host, Morgan, and today Shalini and I are reuniting with the first author we ever interviewed, Mr. James Eggebeen. For those who missed our first discussion, James is the author of novels and stories, including the Apprentice to Master series. He's worked in many fields, including programming, tech, business, and the United States Navy, and began writing fantasy fiction in 2011 and hasn't stopped since. James is something of a special guest to us, as indeed he was the first author we got on the podcast, but he's also a critically acclaimed novelist with a wide range of experiences and a lot of wisdom to share. Shalini and I really enjoyed hearing this seasoned author describe his challenges and process of learning to write in a genre entirely new to him, young adult fantasy. It was reassuring and even inspirational to hear that seasoned writers like him break outside of their wheelhouse, embrace the discomfort of something entirely new, and grow and diversify their work in kind. So without any further ado, we bring you Mr. James Eggebeen. How are you doing, James? Good to see you.
I'm doing really well.
Good.
Nice.
Good.
Yeah, we're just having fun at home like everybody else.
Yeah. Instead of been practicing this social isolation thing for a really long time.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. We spoke to another author, David Ellis, just yesterday, and we were remarking that for fantasy nerds, this isn't too much of a big change, really.
Yeah.
For most of us.
Once again, great to have you back, James. And how have you been since we saw you? It's been over a year.
Yeah, really good. I lost some weight. I still have my job, so everything is good. Been writing a lot. The last book I wrote was really kind of dark, and then I lightened it up a little bit. And now I'm working on young adult stuff, which is way lighter. So it's easier on the brain to write this stuff.
Yeah, we're going to talk quite a bit about the distinctions between young adult and then, I guess, just regular adult fiction. And yeah, because, personally, I never really thought much about the distinction. I didn't really read a ton of young adult fiction when I was younger, and now I think maybe I wish I would have, because I got really into heavy, very mature kind of themes early on, and maybe it kind of shaped my perspective in a different way.
Yeah, I grew up reading young adults, so we had an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and you're actually writing a young adult novel, basically.
Yeah, so. That as well. And there's all these new genres as well with new adult fiction, and I don't know, and there's like all these subgenres within young adult and adult fiction, which is interesting to get into. But before we get into that, can you tell us a bit more about the Apprentice to Master series, which I think we talked a little bit about in our first interview, and where the latest installment, Wizard's Hatchling, will take your fans?
Yeah, sure. That was my first book, and I had self-published it, and it done pretty well for a while, and it was, kind of fading away a little bit. So I did the deal with Athon Press, and they took, the first three books and re-edited them, put new covers on them, and recorded the audiobooks and re-released them, and they did really well. So I called them up and I said, well, I have more. So the Hatchling was really, it started out to be a novella that got away from me, and it got much bigger than I thought. And it was exploring one of the characters in the series. So at the third book, we had this young wizard that they rescued. And at the end of the book, he gets bonded to a dragon. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. So let's see where this story goes. So I started writing it, and it just got more and more detailed. And the dragon kind of has the persona of a young girl, like a younger sister who gets him in trouble a lot, which is really a lot of fun. So it's probably a unique kind of a dragon. And she can assume human form, kind of, and she's not really good at that. So he's kind of coaching her on how to look like a human. And eventually she teaches him how to be a dragon. So it's kind of a fun thing, but it's a little bit darker as well, because they're fighting against this alchemist who is trying to get revenge for them destroying the temple, and she's going to destroy the dragons. So it gets a little darker towards the end, but it does resolve, and it's everybody goes on happy at the end, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always love whenever there's a non-human entity or character but trying to pretend to be a human. Like we're watching the Dragon Prince animated series on Netflix. It's very, very good. And there's one of the elf warriors, this woman, and she's just, putting a hood up, trying to hide her ears that are very, even though her skin tone is obviously not like a human skin tone.
And she only has 4 fingers.
He goes, I'm doing human-y things. I'm walking like a human to go and just.
Yeah. And I mean, dragons in general, it seems like such an archetype in fiction or in fantasy particularly, and people think that it might go away or like it's overused or oversaturated, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. We talked to David Ellis yesterday, and he is also writing a series with dragons in them. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see that people still love reading about dragons and different types of dragons too.
Yeah, and they're not always the bad guy or the evil villain in this case, right? Like the ultimate monster. There's a lot more, I think, diverse interpretations, and I think David even touched upon in that post that he wrote how in Chinese mythology, dragons are quite often nice. Mm. They aid human beings, so it's I think we're just getting more, with globalizing. I don't know. I was going to skip that thought. It's still it's a little.
My dragons are the wise teachers and the ones who bring magics to humans. So they're the good guys, but they tend to be a little bit aloof. But this one, she was not. And to me, one of the most fun things was to write when dragons fly, because I love to fly. I took flying when I was younger. Just go up bore holes in the sky, and that was it. So writing scenes of the dragons flying, and as Kedrick, who's a human that turns into a dragon and learns how to fly, it's a lot of fun because it's hard for him to figure it out at first.
Right.
Which is kind of what it was like for me. Flying wasn't hard. It was landing that scared the crap out of me, and I just never really felt good at it.
Yeah.
But flying was always a lot of fun.
Yeah. And isn't it with landing, that's the most dangerous part of the entire process? Is that true? Or
absolutely. You got to get it right the first time.
Yeah. Right. My father used to as a hobby. I think he flew for a little bit, and once I came around, that promptly came to an end. So,
yeah. What having kids does.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, it's kind of a corny question, but do you think that you having experienced flying, did that give you some different sense of how to write dragons or how to write the sequences where they are flying or when a character's on their back, for example?
I did. And actually, my dragons won't carry humans, and they're very firm about it. You're not getting on my back.
They're not being subverted.
She tells me that several times. You're not getting on my back. It's not happening. But I have one scene in the thing, and it's kind of, and it was written before I saw the flying in. I'm such a terrible one. The guys with the blue guys on the foreign planet.
Avatar.
Avatar. Yes, there's some beautiful flying sequences in there. And I had done something similar, where what you can do is you can steal the wind from somebody else by flying close over the top of them, and they would do that to each other, and then the other one tumbles out of the sky, and it's an interesting, fun thing to do, and then write the feelings and the experience of how it feels like to fall. One of the things they teach you when you're learning how to fly is what's called a stall. So you cut the engine way back, and you nose up until all of a sudden the airplane literally stops flying, right? And you drop, and then you have to recover from that. And that's a really weird feeling, but it's interesting. So it was a lot of fun. So I use those feelings to paint the dragons flying in the book.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, there is a lot of physics to flying and how like aerodynamics work in the sky and things like that, but there's also the emotional side of it where people who haven't flown before might not know exactly how it feels. Like you can imagine how it might feel, especially in dreams when people fall asleep, people tend to feel falling, so that might be something that people can relate to, but it's a totally different world up there. Continuing the topic of dragons, so we're interested in like how dragons are depicted so differently and play so many different roles in stories. So like in Beowulf, like the sort of monster dragon creature, it's not really identified what kind of monster it is, but that's kind of where that dragon archetype comes from. It's always the villain, but then more recently we've seen more sympathetic dragon characters, like in How to Train Your Dragon and the Dragon Prince, as we've mentioned before. There's Tolkien's dragons, which are a bit more of that sort of devil symbolism. So what kind of dragon is the hatchling Suling, and what truth about your human characters do you think she reveals?
She's more like a person than a dragon. She's very impetuous and she's very irresponsible, if you will. And really part of her role is to kind of get Kedrick to lighten up, because Kedrick is very, very strict. He follows the rules. He had a tough childhood, so he tends to be a little bit more nervous about doing stuff he shouldn't, and she gets him into trouble a lot.
Right.
And she centers him when he does get off the bubble and starts being stupid. She kind of brings him back to the straight and narrow. It's like, okay, let's calm down. But it's interesting because I never intended to put dragons in the book to begin with in the series. They just kind of crept in, and pretty soon they're like, oh look, dragons. Okay, now what are you going to do with them? Right. So then I had to kind of look at them, and to my mind they would be intelligent and cooperative. So in the series, the dragons actually helped the wizards build the wizard city. And at some point they decided that their influence was not helping humans to progress, so they all left. So they basically said, okay, we taught you enough, you're on your own, away we go. And they only came back because they were summoned back by a big bad evil guy.
Right.
Yeah, interesting, because I find that that's a common thing where dragons are a placeholder for gods and goddesses in some universes, and they do impart knowledge to humans or to whatever race in question it is. And then they go away, and then in a lot of those stories they also are resurrected somehow, but it is to face a big bad guy. In the video game Skyrim, that's exactly what the case is. And
in World of Warcraft too, so the whole world is kind of, the balance is created by 5 dragon aspects, right? And they take human form as well, and they come to bestow their blessings or their curses on the mortal races as they see fit.
Are yours, James, more, like you said that they're cooperative, are they entirely...
I didn't have any bad dragons. I didn't actually need any. So, yeah, they really don't play a main part in the story.
Okay.
They're like you said, they're the archetypes of the gods. They have lots of power, and the problem with the character with lots of power is that what do you do with them? Because you can't hurt them, you can't defeat them, you can't do anything bad. So they might as well just be gone. Just memories of what they did kind of linger.
Yeah.
But they're more prevalent in this story. But again, they're still mostly off scene. And Suling is not a mighty powerful dragon. She's a teenage girl sister that's nothing but trouble to the wizard, who's also nothing but trouble.
It's cool to see that there's the threads of young adult in this novel as you switch into a young adult fantasy series. Was that something that you kind of realized as you were writing Wizard's Hatchling?
Well, I had no idea what I was doing when I started writing the series, and I just knew what I liked, and I wrote lots of really cool settings with lots of neat descriptions and these deep visceral feels of people doing magic, and people seemed to like that. And as I progressed as a writer, I tended to back away from that a little bit, and people said, I kind of missed that. And I said, you seriously? Like every time I write somebody doing magic, I do this 3-page physical feel of what it feels like when the magic comes on them. They go, we love that. It's like, okay, fine. When we released the Apprentice to Master series, right? It had been out for quite a while, and it took off. It started selling like crazy. I was talking to a publisher, and I go, I don't get it. I don't understand why this is selling. And he said it's really a classic YA book to begin with. I said I never considered it that. I didn't start out to write YA. He said it's got a lot of wonder. It's got a lot of surprise. It's got a lot of descriptions. It's got a lot of cool setting stuff in it. He said that's what the YA crowd looks for. So I thought, okay. After I wrote Indentured Magic, it was like this dark, deep, horrible, grown-up style theme. And I thought, I need something lighter. What I did, though, is I wrote a couple more books in the Apprentice to Master series that are going through that, and then switched over to YA. And this one now is absolutely YA. And I signed up with a couple of classes I'm taking with David Farland. And I signed up my first ever going to a real live writers conference in June, and now I'm not sure whether we'll actually get to go in person or not.
Right.
But it's a week-long class on how to write YA.
Oh, wow.
So I definitely, I'm going to get the classes, and I started downloading some of the prep material, and I read a couple of his books. And one of the little books he had was called Writing with Wonder. And I started reading this book, and it was like a V8 slap your head moment. I was like, oh, this is it. This is what I forgot. He talks about the YA crowd, the younger kids. They want something wonder. They want something cool. Right? And I was reading this, and I thought, okay. I have a friend who's a professional author, very successful in fantasy, and she just actually tore me up one day and said, this could be anywhere. You're writing fantasy. It should be something phenomenal. I want to see something I've never seen before. I want to see something cool and full of magic and strange stuff. Right? And I remembered that, and I thought, you know what? That's what I need to do. I need to go back. And so I've been pulling up photos from different places, artwork, fantasy artwork, and looking for that sense of wonder and trying to write that back in, so that there's a lot of surprise, there's a lot of twists, there's a lot of really cool settings going on and things moving around and magic happening all the time. So I'm hoping that that's going to work. It's a lot of fun to write that for me. I kind of like that. So I think that's a good place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know that I definitely do that. I just go on Google Images and just type in fantasy art, and then boom, motivation for another 3 hours.
Yeah.
It's just so great, and it's so abundant, right, and easy to access.
Yeah.
James, have you read YA extensively prior to wanting to get more serious about it and doing classes?
No,
Yeah,
not really. I've been reading fantasy. I didn't even realize there was a difference between YA and adult stuff. So I don't really have a good feel for YA strictly. I mean, I read all the Harry Potter stuff, but that was like middle grade in YA.
Mm-hmm.
And I did pull up one of those books and kind of went through it. I was like, let me see if I can understand what she's doing here. And I was like, yeah, I see it, but that's not quite me,
right,
stylistically. But I do see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And the classes, the stuff I've been taking, they all make sense. They do. So I'm like, okay, I understand this.
Yeah. Do you have to be in a different headspace to write young adult versus regular adult fiction? And what kind of like more technical stuff do you feel like you have to learn before you fully get immersed into it, or are you just writing as you go?
I wrote the whole book, and then I went back and I was taking some of the pre-class. This is going to be the book I'm going to take to that week-long class. And then I read it and realized that I'd missed the mark on quite a few things. So I went back and I just finished all of my notes for a rewrite, and I'm starting to rewrite it. Mm-hmm. So, for example, and I just kicked myself because I did this. So I wrote that the opening is the girl climbs underneath the pine tree and she's trying to make a candle come to life with magic, right? And she can't, right? And when she comes out of the pine tree, there's people there and they're laughing at her, right? Now, first us, my writing group, a couple of people said, well, this isn't a great opening. I said, this is a perfect YA opening. I said, the girl is she's fearing that she's going to be seen, that she's not good enough to do magic, and then she gets caught trying to do it and failing, right? But then I looked at it and I thought, who cares if she's under a pine tree, right? So I did exactly what we were talking about. I Googled image search and I found this cool-looking painting of a tree with these deep gnarled roots and this great big clock in the face and a whole bunch of stuff. So I went back and I rewrote it. So now she's not ducking underneath your standard average old pine tree, right? She's found this tree in the forest that's got the deep roots that, delve into the earth to touch the raw magic. And the clock face ticks off, the number of minutes until the end of the age of magic will, come upon them. I was like, okay, now I got a cool, a cool opening. It's got something neat and wonderful, and it's got all this stuff moving around and all sorts of cool stuff you hadn't seen before, as opposed to a bland old pine tree. Like that's what I've been missing. And that's what I did in my first book too. Is I had a lot of those cool settings that I spent a lot of time painting the details to, and that's a lot of fun. It's challenging to portray it well, I think.
We've talked about this recently as well, about the collaboration between fine arts artists, so I include creative writing in that, but with visual artists and people who create music and dramatic stuff as well. Just the sort of cross-pollination that happens between them and how we get inspired by art or by soundtrack as we write. Mm-hmm. It's such an integral part to it, and it's so interesting to get those threads from not just other writers, but from other fine arts practitioners out there. Is that something that you have done a lot, like go through fantasy artwork and music and soundtrack, or is that sort of something that's been lit up since you started YA?
No, I started that way, and then I kind of backed away from it. No, I'm kind of glad to be back.
Yeah.
I had all these really cool images. They're still on my computer from when I wrote these series originally, and there was like this pool with these white stalactites drip down because it's real salty water.
Yeah.
Right. It's all terrace pools and all this stuff, and I got the picture, and I was like, this is really cool. So I had to use that in one of the scenes, and I spent a lot of time describing that so that you can get a real good feel for what it is.
Yeah.
So it's something I really enjoy, and it's a fun challenge to try and make that come alive and get somebody to look at that and show them the picture, and they go, oh yeah, that's what I thought.
Right.
As opposed to show the picture like, what's that? Well, that's, the scene from that chapter. Like, no, sorry, didn't get it.
Yeah, that's not a great feeling. Yeah, let's move on to talk a bit more about your series and how long it's kind of gone on, and it's such a good marker of a story when it's expanded through years and almost to a decade. So you first started working on this book around 2013, right? Like the first two Apprentice to Master series. Can you take us through your writing practice about going back and forth between story worlds? So you've written other stories as you've gone through this series. And what's the most important thing that you learned in writing in the same world for close to a decade now?
The series, I kind of had thought it was going to be done. So I got that. The Hatchling was in there. There was another book in there that they decided not to publish. That was a prequel. But no, they decided they probably will pick it up because the series is doing really well. Mm-hmm. So I had written the 5 books in the series, and I moved on to something else. I actually had a friend who said, bring me the book you liked the most of all the things you read. And that was, to me, was L.E. Modest's Imager. And she read the book, and she came back to me, and she said, this is a first person, and you don't write first person. Mm. So how can this be your favorite book? It's like, oh, man, all right. So I sat down to learn how to write first person, which for me was really hard because everything was written in third person. And I wrote The Reluctant Wizard, and that was done in first person. And it was a really good learning experience, but it didn't fit in with the canon of the rest of the series. Right? If you really try hard, you'll see that what I find is a lot of the magical systems cross-pollinate between books. Mm-hmm. So somewhere deep in my mind, there's a belief in how magic works, and it keeps coming out the same way. When I did Indentured Magic, it was really based on an inspiration of something I felt like I needed to do. It hasn't been near as popular. It's one of those things I think posthumously after I'm dead like 50 years. So this was a great book. Right now, nobody wants to hear it. So what I did then is I went back and I thought, okay, so I had the Hatchling that was going to go into the series, and I had it was called Wizard's Pair. And it was the genesis of 2 of the characters in the main series. It was 400 years before the series takes place. Mm. And that was the explanation of how the dragons originally left the Earth. So I pulled that out, and then there's something I had always wanted to do, and this is something that L.E. Modest did that totally blew me away. The first book of his that I read was called Magical Engineer. And being an engineer, I picked it up because that would be something cool, right? And yeah, sure enough, he was an engineer. He's building like steam engines and right. And he's a black wizard. They work with order. And then the chaos wizard, the white wizard, is totally mucking up the world, right? They're causing all sorts of trouble, and they're fighting against each other, and it's a big conflict. Okay, great. A couple of months later, I picked up another book. It was called Color of Chaos. I'm starting to read it, and I went, wait a minute. This is the white wizard from the other story. Mm-hmm. And it was the antagonist from the Magical Engineer. Right? And it was his story, and he was sympathetic. He was a good guy. He did everything altruistically. And those black wizards, they were just mucking up the thing, right? And it was totally blew me away because here he was the hero in his own story, but he was the villain in the other book. And I thought, I got to do that. I got to do this. So I took the villain in the series. His name is Sulred. He's the big bad wizard who starts the temple, and I wrote his story. And I thought it was going to be 1 book. It's probably going to be 2. The first one is done. And it shows the genesis of where he comes from. And this was a really challenging story because he's a bad guy, right? He murders young boys, takes their magic. He's killing dragons. He's doing all sorts of horrible stuff. He starts this evil temple that's, a blight on the land. And I had to make him sympathetic. So I spent some time, again, with one of my friends, and we kind of kicked around some of the ways to do that, and I think it worked. The book is done. I've had a couple of people read it, and they go, "Yeah, I really like this guy." It's like, that's the bad guy from the other series, right? No, I didn't know that. Okay, so I think it's working. And then there was another character that appears both in the Hatchling and in the third book of the series, and she originally starts in the story. Kedrick goes into a pub. He's being a putz, and he hits on this girl, and she says, "I have great grandchildren older than you are." Right? So she looks like a 16-year-old girl, and she claims to be 400 years old. And it turns out that she's a healer, and she's a very popular healer, but she looks like a young girl. Mm. So I thought, I got to explain how that came to be about. So I wrote a book about her. So it explains how did she come to be 400 years old and look like a 16-year-old girl. So it takes her through and it kind of weaves into the origination of the temple. So it kind of overlaps a little bit with the wizard pair and what's called the priest. So now I've got these 3 books that kind of give you the genesis of the characters in the series. And it was a lot of fun because I was able to then kind of explain how some of the things came to be in the series. Mm. Right, so we get to see how did the temple rise, and how did Amidon get built, and where did the dragons go, and and how did these 2 wizards that were also 400 years old get to be that way? So I had 4 characters who were all very, very old, and this kind of explains how they all came to be the way they were. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's nice to knit all those threads together and kind of show the world as you see it in your head to readers who might be interested, and to get further sort of stories out there of all the interesting characters, and even to find them for yourself as well, because the first time you write them, you might not necessarily know their whole backstory, and it's kind of cool to get into that.
Yeah, James, I do have a question stemming from that scene that you just described, where teenage girl is mistaken for being what she looks like, and meanwhile she's actually 400 years old. One thing that I noticed and again, Dragon Prince is basically the only real young adult fantasy that I've consumed recently. I noticed that in that style, the characters and their ages and the differences between them and how they relate to one another are almost more exaggerated. And what I mean is the younger characters do look up to the older characters. They do defer to them. There's more parental themes. There's more. I'm trying to formulate a good question around that, but do you think that is one of the defining features of YA, even though you're very short into this kind of journey and learning more about it? Do you think that is a key feature of it? And I just ask because I noticed that in regular adult fantasy, those kinds of distinctions between age groups aren't really played up as much. And I think they tend to focus, especially these days, and in dark fantasy especially, on how all the characters are kind of equalized in their misery or whatever it is, or in their struggles, right? From kids to old age, it's all terrible, or it's all wonderful. It depends what the universe is. I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on that.
It's interesting. My father asked me one time. They said, "Why do none of your characters have parents?" I said, "Well, because parents would protect them, so they have to be." It's a lot with Disney. None of the kids in Disney movies ever have parents either, right? Otherwise, the parents will make everything okay, so the kids can't struggle, right? And one of the things they brought up when we were taking one of these classes on YA, he said, younger readers like to read about somebody who's a little bit older than they are, right? Yeah. So he says you never write about a 13-year-old girl and then think 13-year-old girls are going to read that story, because they're not interested, right? So you write about a 16-year-old girl, and 13-year-old girls think it's cool because they're older and they're learning something. Right? So I think in the younger adults, that age difference makes a big difference, right? When we're young, right, in high school, oh heavens no, you're a freshman, you're dating a junior, right? That's like you're 2 years difference, right? And when you get to be my age, 2 years, like the only reason we care about age anymore is because who's going to retire first, right? That's about it. When you're like 40, who cares? 10 years plus or minus doesn't really matter, right? It only matters at the beginning and the end. So for the younger audience, it's more important that they have that. I think you've got to have the archetypical wise person that comes in, and that could be the grandparents or the wise old wizard or the dragon or whoever it is, right? But typically parents are too closely tied to the person and too protective. Right? So you can't get in near as much trouble if your parents are watching as if you're out on your own.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of how we do it. And in my stories, most of the kids are right. The theory is that magic comes alive in you when you reach puberty. So most of the characters are right on that age. They're in that young adult age group, but I never actually say how old they really are. But that's kind of the age that they are, and they behave a little bit more like people that age, if I remember correctly. But it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you do like more in-depth research now on youth culture? I guess because it changes so quickly. Like,
Yeah. Are you on TikTok, James?
Don't do TikTok.
Yeah.
I poke around on the internet and run into a lot of things that I probably wouldn't normally run into. It's funny. I got on Twitter a couple of years back, and what I found is that people post these angsty posts, right? You had to sit on a hashtag, and somebody's like, what a crappy day. And what I would do is I would just respond with some positive, uplifting affirmation kind of a response. Right? And pretty soon I had like 3,000 followers, and my son, who at the time was like 25, was going, "How are you doing that?" I said, "Just look at my Twitter stream. What do you think I'm doing?" He goes, "Oh," I said, "Okay." I said, "That's really all it takes, right? Is you're giving people, positive strokes when they're feeling down, and they're like lining up, right?" So, but then I found out that Twitter doesn't really do a whole lot for me as far as getting your books out there, getting readers. It's it's a different culture.
Yeah.
So my kids are kind of older now. They're both hitting close to 30, so I don't have any young ones to look at anymore. The grandkids are way too young for that. So, but I read a lot. I know what's going on the internet, and it kind of bleeds over. We know what's happening on TikTok. I think the scariest thing is when I did research for Indentured Magic to find out how these people are grooming children and how they're getting access to them. I saw a video where they created a fake profile of an 11-year-old girl, hit a stopwatch, turned it live. 30 seconds later, she was being hit on. Like,
yeah,
wow.
Crazy.
There's a lot of strange culture out there, and what I'm trying to do is to bring, kind of light, airy stuff. I've always written for, what I would call a clean audience. There's no sex, there's no graphic violence, there's no language, there's nothing you wouldn't want your kids reading. Then that gets you into libraries. It gets you into a lot of places. And I've had debates with a couple of friends. They're like, well, I write graphic sex scenes in my fantasy. I said, it's too bad because you really limit your audience that way. Oh, no. Yeah, I said, you do. Yes, there's people who like it, but there's a lot of people who don't.
Right.
So you kind of have to understand your audience, and you got to write for them.
I think that's why Harry Potter is so, and a lot of other classics are so timeless in that they cross age boundaries, because there aren't, even though it can be realistic in the fact that, it's looking at a kid growing up through 7 years, there isn't, this explicit sort of angle to it. And for that, really young kids can, parents can read to them, or, going all the way up to, people in their 70s or 80s reading Harry Potter and enjoying them.
Yeah.
I think that is a bit of a hallmark of a classic. Is the fact that it's accessible to different age audiences. So you can return to them and not feel like, oh, that's something that I read back in the day. You're still actually immersed in that.
And, we had a big discussion about vocabulary, which to me is a fascinating thing. I have a really big vocabulary, and I tend to use the words that a lot of people don't get. And I'll give you an example. And I never got it. There was a Disney movie with the character in Hades. The guy comes rolling down the stairs, bump, 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 bump. And he goes up and he says, "Yes, your lugubriousness." Right? I'm like, there's not a kid on the planet who knows what that means, and most adults. Right? So why did they put that in there, right? It was for that small handful of people who actually knew what that word meant, and they were laughing, right? And my wife was like, "What are you laughing at?" I was like, "I'm not even going to try to explain it." Yeah. So I had the word where one of the characters acquiesced, and I posted into it in a group I was in, and I said, "What do you guys think?" And half the people were like, "Well, the kids won't get it." Right? And then one who does a lot of why, he said, "Okay, look," he said, the teachers are going to sign your book for book reports, so make them the right length for book report, which means it should be running about 250 pages, about 80,000 words. He said, but they want you to teach vocabulary as well. So use the word, but give enough context so that they can figure out what it means in the context. And they're like, I got it. So he said, don't just say he acquiesced. Give us the emotional decision around his decision to acquiesce. And then they'll catch up what the word is in context, and that's what they like to see in the young adult stuff.
Right.
So okay, good. I like that.
Yeah, that's
so I
very
don't
true.
have another vocabulary.
Yeah, as a young adult reader for most of my life, a lot of the words that I've read and came to understand was not through like Shakespeare or like through formal study. It was through books that I read that were in fantastical worlds, and they had all these words. And yeah, it takes a bit of a science almost to kind of place words that people normally wouldn't use and kind of make it like you're pushing them towards understanding what that word is. That's actually pretty interesting. Yeah. But I'm thinking back again to Harry Potter, but I learned so much about British culture and understood it somehow by the way that Rowling wrote British culture. Even though like houses and prefects and all these things were not part of my upbringing, I understood what a prefect was. I understood what houses were for, and all those kind of things. So,
yeah, I know what you mean because as a kid you'll hear your houses and they'll think, oh, like the one I'm in right now. Is that what you're talking about? No, it means that, there's heraldry. It's a union of people. It's you're not all related to each other. Well, I read The Hobbit as a kid with a dictionary right next to me because yeah.
And this diligent student.
And sometimes, of course, I even read the definition and I go, I still don't really know what that means. But yeah, it's neat though that you pointed that out because I think that YA is used a lot in schools now these days, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think when I was growing up, it wasn't really.
Yeah, not as much.
Really weird stuff.
Like Catcher in the Rye and stuff. It's not
really,
considered.
I know. I don't know what it is about Catholic school. Like you just go straight from you just go right to the edgiest stuff possible, and then it's just we'll figure out like who the evil character is, and find the very black and white moral part of the story. And say, no, it's not actually like that.
Yeah.
So
Catholic school.
Yeah, that's neat. So I guess in a way, with James, the sense that I have is, in a way, your expertise, having already been an accomplished author and written the more mature themes and have delved into some of those darker areas, have all kind of come together, and they're making your YA venture a little bit more realistic because it's almost like this is going to be a terrible analogy. Forgive me in advance. Is you first learn to use those big words, but then they tell you in school, we want you to do concision now, summarize things, get the point across quickly, and you're like, well, I can't. I need to have 4 pages to write what I could write in a paragraph. And do you think that is kind of what you're doing in YA? Like, are you basically trying to summarize things? I know it's a kind of a weird question, but
actually not really. It's interesting because when I started to write this book, I used my standard template. I pull it out and it says, it's going to be 125,000 words and so many chapters, and here's where all the major signposts go, and here's where the midpoint shift is. And then I started looking at the pre-material for the class, and he said, okay, look, and it's just like it just went pop, the light bulb went on. He said, kids are going to sign book reports. The book has to be at least 250 pages long. If it's 500, they're not going to read it because that's twice the work. So he says you want to dial it in to come in right on top of that 250 pages plus a little bit so that they can turn it in for a book report and it's not too much extra work. I was like, ooh, okay. So, so I kind of looked at the story and thought, I can kind of trim some of this stuff back and, move a couple of plot lines around and kind of get the whole thing to land in at 80,000 words. And when I got done, I was like, oh, man, this is great. This is barely getting started, because I'm used to writing 120, 130,000 words. So 80 was that's like an afternoon session, right? Now I'm looking back and I'm working on it. I'm going, okay, well, I'm kind of expanding a lot because I'm putting in that sense of wonder and that adventure. And I'm looking at it thinking, I wonder if it's getting a little bit long. And if it starts to get long, what can I cut out without breaking anything? And I can kind of get a feel for a few scenes that maybe don't need to be there that bad. Maybe cut a little bit of the subplot and still get the thing to come in at the right length. So and that to me is a different thing. Otherwise, it was like, who cares? It's it's going to be an ebook. It's going to be print on demand. Let it be as long as it wants to. Right. So now I'm trying to get it to a shorter length.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I wasn't going to say anything.
Oh.
I just went, because I'm dumb. So, So let me see here. Well, actually, I wanted to talk about the novellas. Yeah. Maybe you can do a better job of posting this question than I can.
Number 5.
You wrote it after.
Okay, well, we were talking a bit about how you have all these novels of within the same story world and keeping up with different characters that you've introduced. So we thought it might be interesting to ask, what's your ethos regarding the sort of adage of to be a successful independent author, you have to keep publishing stories? Do you find that this is true to find success as an indie author, or is there something else that you work with?
It's interesting because being an indie author is hard, right? And there's a little marketing, there's visibility, there's a lot of work. You got to get your covers done, and right. So I was writing on these last couple of books, and I thought, I got to get an editor, I got to get covers lined up, I got to get my budget together. All right, so I called the guys at Aethon and said, "Hey, dude, look, I got a couple more books in the world. You want them?" And he goes, "Yeah, I would probably." It's okay, fine. So I'm going to finish them up, and you guys can deal with all the hard stuff. You turn them into ebooks, do the covers, and it was such a relief. I was like, "Oh, that's so great."
Yeah.
The next one, the YA, my goal is to get that picked up by somebody like Tor. So that's exactly what I'm after. That's the reason why I'm taking the classes. You get a chance to meet agents. I'm going to call a couple of friends and say, okay, I've never asked you for anything before, but now I am. I want your help getting introduce me to your agent, right? I want somebody who can get me into Tor, and I want to sell it to a big publisher. So that's kind of the way I'm going. What I found was really interesting is I had spent a lot of time doing sales and marketing and all sorts of stuff to promote, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You get a return on your investment, but sometimes you're like, how long do I take pouring money into advertising to get, a 50% return? Because that was just really painful. So when I did the Aethon deal and those kind of took off, the rest of my back catalog just zipped right along with them. So I was like, okay, so people are reading the stuff that they're publishing, and then they're going on and they're finding the other stuff. So that's doing better as well. Right. So I think the hybrid thing for me is working out really well. Mm-hmm. But I really, really want to get into a different, into the big publishers. And I was talking to a friend of mine who, she's traditionally published, been doing it forever, and she said, you're there. You should be able to get in. This is good enough stuff that you should be able to get picked up. So I'm hoping. Nice. I'm hoping I'll get picked up. You never know.
Yeah, that is the dream after all, right?
Yeah, I mean, indie publishing does work for a lot of people. I guess it just depends on what your style is and how much capacity you have to take on all the little bits and pieces about promoting your work and putting it out there and converting it into ebook and blah blah blah. The list goes on. So I guess it is about like where you fit comfortably on that spectrum, and how you want to go about and how much sort of control you have over your work as well. Do you find that working as in a hybrid sort of situation that you have a good balance of control over, like, let's say cover art or the fonts that they use or whatever it is? Or
who cares? Huh?
Okay.
I think they use Vellum just like I do. The fonts are whatever. They did a great job on the audiobook. It just blew me away. I love the narrator, and he's working on the next couple. He was sick for a while, so he couldn't get the other books done in time, but I think they're back in production. They came up with covers that probably I never would have thought of. But they look really cool, and then they seem to be pretty popular, so I'm like, okay, fine. And we're kind of going back and forth on the cover for the Hatchling. Like, what do you think? I was like, number 3. And you go, we like number 2. I was like, fine, do it. I don't care. You guys know what you're doing. You know what's going to work, so yeah, go for it. So in that respect, I'm fine with it. I don't care. Yeah. My cover designer feels bad because she put a lot of work into my covers that were pretty nice before we did the deal, but they weren't really fitting with the style. So that's the publisher wants the style to look like the rest of their catalog, so they had to be changed. But
right.
That's fine. I understand that. That's business.
Yeah, we've been hearing about there has to be consistency in
the style of the art.
Yeah,
but it's interesting to talk to different authors who want to have control over the whole package of the book, but for you it seems like it's just the story that you want to concentrate on, and then just kind of pushing it to where it needs to go to actually reach an audience is part of someone else's business.
I've got strong author branding on my self-published stuff. I'll continue to do that if I keep on self-publishing stuff. And then, Athon has their branding, which is through their publishing company. That's fine. I understand that it works. And you're right. For me, it's a lot more about the story. That's the part that I like. And I really like, crafting that story and then getting it to actually work, which is sometimes challenging. And sometimes you think you got it and you're like, you take it to somebody else and you go, no idea what you're talking about. Right? You're like, I don't get it. Oh, crap. All right, fine. I'll go back and try it again. Right? And go back and try it again. So that's, to me, is the fun part is crafting the words so that they convey the ideas and the impressions and the emotions that you want. When you talk about going from adult to the younger stuff, for me, writing Indentured Magic was incredibly hard because I didn't tend to have a lot of emotional depth in secondary characters. And that book was all about the secondary characters. It was all about the emotional journey of people going through some really tough stuff. And it had to be really based on how they responded to things that were happening to them, not what was actually happening to them, right? Which was a very complicated learning experience. And now that I've got that behind me, it's like really easy to write these emotionally deep characters. Right. So I think that was a good thing, and it'll carry over into the YA because it's like, in the middle of the note is like, how does she feel about so-and-so? Oh, okay, yeah, let's add that in. It's not like I got to sit down and think for half an hour. I go, how the person, show, now I kind of got a better idea on how to show those emotions.
Yeah.
So I think that was a good translation of that skill set.
Yeah. I've been finding just in my own writing, like when I want to talk about how a child feels, I just have to think about how I would have felt. And I go, well, I've been there. It's easy. It's a character that's vastly older than I am. A bit harder. Haven't been in that, and
Right.
I think, do you think that that's part of it?
I was watching a show, right? We're all stuck in the house. So I turned on the TV. It was called 100 Humans, and they're basically taking 100 people and they kind of divide them up by some attribute and they test them. Mm-hmm. So in this one, they were testing groups of 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 something, and they gave them physical tasks and cognitive skills and all sorts of stuff. And what was really bizarre is when they ended up is that the 20 somethings and the 60 somethings basically had almost equivalent cognitive skills.
Oh, wow.
And then the 30s, 40s, and 50s were at a big dip, right? So they bring this guy in, he says, what happened? He said, well, when you're young, you have really fast processing speed. You can figure stuff out really quickly, but you don't know anything. He said, when you get older, we have what we call crystallized, knowledge. He says, you know so much. You've been through so many experiences. So you don't actually have to think about it because you actually just recall it from memory. Right? He said, so those are equivalent skills that are being brought to bear here. Right. And I think, I had never actually imagined myself getting old. And then all of a sudden, I was like, oh, what happened? I'm like 62 years old. Right. But as you get older, right, you realize that some things that you thought were really, really important as kids just actually don't matter.
Yeah.
Right? They're transient. They'll be over. Get over it. Right. It'll be done. Right. This whole thing, my wife is like, panicking. Is look, we've been through market fluctuations. Yeah, this is the worst thing you've ever experienced in your life, but you're still healthy. Right? You will survive, right?
Yeah.
We're not. Right? We do cover, right? That's the way it works, right? You just can't do anything about it, and stressing isn't going to help you. Mm-hmm. Right? So you kind of you get a more mature perspective as you get older, because you just realize that there's so many things that could have killed you and didn't. That okay, I guess it wasn't really that big a deal.
Yeah.
Right? Or something that was horrible at the time, and I lost my first wife to cancer. It was 2 years of going through doctor visits and wheelchairs and blah blah blah. It was horrible stuff. But it was an experience that was over, and it's something now I can look at, I can draw on, I understand. When I see other people going through it, I know how to have empathy. I know what they're feeling and what they're not. Right, and what kind of things they would be looking for, and what kind of things they don't want at all. Right. My wife had a friend who had cancer, and I said, the best thing you can do is sit with her one night a week so her husband can go bowling, so he can have a normal life. Right. Mm-hmm. And she said, nobody would have thought of that. I said, well, I do, because I know how he feels. Right. He wants to be able to get out of the house and do something normal. Right. So you develop that perspective of experience as you get older, and it makes it easier to portray stuff. Unfortunately, we all remember, what it was like to be a kid because we've got these horrible memories that frozen in time by sheer terror and embarrassment, and you can't make them go away no matter how hard you try. So it's really easy to call those up.
Yeah.
Right. And then as you get older, you got all this other stuff that, experience goes along the way. So I think it makes it easier to write a broader spectrum of stuff when you get older. And you see a lot of writers are older. And that may be the reason for it, is that they just have much more experience to draw on. Doesn't mean that younger writers can't write the same richness. But as you said, how do you portray a 60-year-old? I've never been one. It's like me when I say, how do you portray a 13-year-old girl? I've never been one, and I can't ask. I want to say, hey, can somebody give me a 13-year-old girl? You look at you like, no.
Yeah. I could say, well, I'll go to the seniors' home right across the road, and I go, oh, right, there's a pandemic
Quarantine.
on. I don't want to potentially kill like everybody who's in there because I'm a carrier. Yeah.
You could Skype them,
I know.
Just Skype into the home.
It's true.
Yeah, that'd be pretty fun.
Maybe they're gonna do that because they still have to do entertainment and stuff.
True, yeah.
So
they brought people to like play music and things like that there. So I hope they have some sort of substitute for that for them.
Yeah,
I do a couple of weekly Zoom meetings, and I had a writers group. I was trying to do a story structure group to get together. And my wife is always reluctant to let me bring people into the house. I don't know why. She just doesn't like strangers and doesn't want them here on a Saturday morning, which we had the meetings. So the week I was like, you know what? Let's just do this as a Zoom meeting. So I put it out onto my group, and I got about 5 or 6 people who wanted to do that. So to me, that's really cool, and it works really well because you don't have to physically go anywhere.
Yeah.
And you can still have the face-to-face meeting. So, I kind of like that. It's really interesting. I said we're going to find a lot of things can be done over Skype and over video conferencing, which fortunately we have really good technology for. 10 years ago, this would have been impossible.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Now everybody can do just click on your computer, Zoom, Facebook, whatever. My wife is talking to her granddaughter in Arizona on Facebook like 10 times a week. Right? They're always on Facebook, and she's on her phone, video conferencing with the 6 months old in Arizona.
Yeah. So
it's really cool. So I think, there's a lot of stuff we can do still to keep that contact alive, even though you can't have any physical contact.
Yeah. On that topic, James, I wanted to ask if you feel like the self-isolation that really everyone's currently experiencing has been good or bad in terms of your creativity. Because we've had kind of mixed results. Like I feel pretty there's lots of time. It's wonderful. I feel like there's less distractions, which is good. How do you feel in this kind of circumstance?
It's interesting because that topic actually came up this morning in one of the groups I was in, and the group leader said, so how are you guys all doing? There's about 150 of us who are in an advanced writing group. And he said, how is this affecting your creativity? And a lot of people said, it's horrible. I can't write. Right. So what I see people is, and I feel the same thing, right? To me, I'm self-isolated, but I'm always self-isolated. I work at home. I almost never leave the house, right? And I feel stress, right?
Yeah.
It's a difference between I don't leave the house because I don't want to, and I don't leave the house because it might kill me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that underlies a lot of people. So what I've been working on is doing a lot of revision, and to me that's great. I can read the story. I can make notes. I can go. Now that I'm writing new stuff into an existing story, it's easy because I'm not creating.
Right.
But I think that creating part is a little harder when you have stress in your life, and we all have stress in our life right now. So I think that may be affecting a lot of people. Because I thought the same thing too. I thought, oh great, we're going to have like 8 million virus novels coming out within the next couple of weeks because all these people have time on their hands. They're going to sit down and bang out a novel and self-publish, and voila, the whole world's flooded with them. And it turns out that no, they're not getting as much done as they thought they were.
Right.
No, I mean the extroverts in my life are losing their minds. So
yeah,
it's just
it's not a good time to be an extrovert.
No.
My wife she's very social, and her company is a critical company, so they're working right. The management is working from home. All the production workers are at the factory. Right? And then they decided, well, I got to play mahjong because we work together all day long. We might as well play mahjong at night. So up they went. So. Don't look at me. I'm not even leaving the house for groceries. I use Instacart. I'll wait 3 days for my stuff to come up, leave it on the porch for 2 hours, and then wipe it down, spray it with antibiotic spray. I'm not taking any chances.
Yeah.
She's out there working anyways, and that's it. But I think there's a whole lot of people that are just absolutely losing their minds because they're not used to they're not used to being alone, right? And like I said, there's a lot of dads spending time with their kids that they didn't used to. A lot of moms are now homeschooling that they never thought they would have to. My daughter-in-law is she works in healthcare, so she works in a hospital, and she was going to school full time. with a new baby, which I tell her, like, God, you're a superhuman person to be able to do that. Because it's really, really. And her school moved online. She said, I love it. I get to be home with the baby, so much more.
Yeah.
And I can do stuff with her that I couldn't do because I had to be gone. Right? So I think there's good things to that, is that, as a society, we tended to be really, really so busy. And now all of a sudden, nobody has any social obligations, or they can't fulfill any ones that they might have. So they're home with their families. So they're getting a chance to. I said, we're going to see two things coming out of this. We're going to see, an increase in domestic violence and divorce, and a whole lot of brand new babies.
Right.
Because they're going one way or the other. So, it's interesting, but I think, people, I'm amazed. I really am, because I live in California. California is a very liberal state. I'm not a terrible liberal, so it's challenging sometimes. They locked this place down, and I did not see people whining about it. I didn't see people defying the orders. I mean, he said, go home and stay there, and everybody went home and stayed there. And I was like, seriously? You guys all did this? And you look at the numbers, and the numbers show that it was working, which to me was amazing that the Californians would actually do that, because we're used to being out all the time. Now, it's been cold and rainy, so that kind of helps. But, I'm quite surprised at how many people are voluntarily staying home, right? And I know it's tough, for a lot of people. So it's stressful, but it's it's going to be an interesting story to tell our kids, or your kids, my kids. They're living through it, right?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time to be living and being part of this, for sure. But the response has been very surprising. Like, I mean, it's been quite different throughout the world, depending on where you're talking about. But the level of immediacy that people have felt and actually following the rules, it's been amazing to see that. And hopefully we can do that for other sort of imminent crises like climate change and things like that. Because people always say, oh, we don't have time to, or the resources to really
It's like
tackle it.
The hell we do.
Yeah, but now we've seen that people,
they actually,
yeah.
A guy brought this up, and I thought, what a putz for actually bringing it up. But you're right. He said there are more people have been saved because of the coronavirus than have died because of it.
Oh, interesting.
And he said there's fewer traffic accidents. There's fewer violent incidents. He said the air is cleaning up. Right, the industrial pollution is gone. The airlines are grounded. The air is getting clean. There's fish swimming in the canals in Venice. There haven't been for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So he said, the planet without humans interfacing with it is healing, right? Which is an interesting, an interesting concept, because, I mean, right now all the people are holed up in their houses, so it's like we weren't here, right? So the carbon footprint's dropping, industrial footprint's dropping. All that stuff that was causing a negative impact is dropping. We're seeing very quickly recovery in a lot of places. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
But it's like it puts the gas crisis we went through 30 years ago to shame, right? I was talking to my daughter-in-law about lining up for gas in California. She's like, "Oh, it's so crazy you lived through that. We learned about that in history." It's like,
yeah, I think it really puts the perspective to people that we live the history that we learn in school or on the internet or whatever. Like, it's not just events that happen in the past. History continues to happen in a way.
Yeah.
And this will one day be history as well.
I know. We always used to think it's, history is just those black and white photos of people, X number of generations ago. When everything was just worse, in all regards, of course.
Nothing can happen in the 2000s or 2010s.
Yeah.
It's
the new millennium. Well, now it's the second decade of the new millennium.
Yeah.
To me, it's interesting, because I think we're going to see a lot of change in a lot of places. My oldest son is a videographer for electronic music DJs. Right? His business has virtually come to a standstill. Right, so I texted him the other day. I was like, "Where are you?" He lives in LA. He goes, "I'm up in Napa." So what are you doing? He said, "I'm trying to come up with a new business model because my other one's dead." Right. So he's trying to come up with something that works. I think for a lot of us, we're fortunate to be able to work from home. Right. So we're doing the same thing as we were doing before. But other people are going to have to find new things to do, and I think they will find new things to do. I think people are they're smart. They're resourceful. They'll come up with stuff. People are they're good that way. They'll figure it out. I always said, especially Americans, when Americans decide to do something, they do it, right? They just, okay, we're changing the way things work. We're going to, go in a completely new direction. It's going to start tomorrow. So I think we'll see interesting things develop. To me, one of the things I see is building our own medical supplies in the States is a really kind of a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would be nice to have a big stockpile as well. And it's funny, you look at the old Bill Gates speech when he talks about, he says the next world war is not going to be fought with bombs. It's going to be a germ, and he's going to kill a lot of people, and we're just not ready for it. That was 5 years ago he gave that speech, right? And now people are going, oh, crap, we probably should have listened to him. You think maybe now this time we'll listen, right? We'll pay attention.
Yeah.
$2 trillion to bail out the economy would have bought a lot of medical supplies 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, right. So, I think those are the kinds of lessons that they're going to be really hard to learn, but we're going to learn them, and we'll do something about it. And, whether this, becomes a normal thing, a lot of things I'm reading are saying, get prepared for this. This could be the new normal. We're going to be locked down for a while. They're going to open up a little bit, and then the incident rate will climb, and they'll lock back down again.
Right.
They said maybe you'll only get to see your friends on 3 months of the year, and the rest of the time you'll be home. Okay. That'd be scary.
That's a scary prospect. But if we know anything from stories and reading, is that humans adapt no matter what the situation is.
Yeah, I have a lot of hope for what is going to come too. Like I'm pretty optimistic, and I think the cool thing is, everyone is, I think, pulling together. I mean, like, even in Canada as well, as long as the Prime Minister gets behind a camera and says, we're all going to be okay, then we all believe him, and then...
Right.
Yeah. And, we live in downtown Vancouver, and we can see the nice, beautiful bay that we can't go to, but every night at 7 p.m., everybody gets onto their balconies and out their windows and is banging pots and pans and clapping.
Yeah. 7 p.m. on the dot.
On the dot, yeah. So I think it is giving us also a sense that, hey, we all are in this together, truly, regardless of all the weird distinctions that we come up with and all the ways that we, try to distance ourselves from each other in normal life. It's like, no, we're all, this is affecting everybody.
Yeah.
And we all have a part to play. We all have responsibilities. And yeah, so far it's been quite uplifting in a way that this is, that people are responding to this well. And I mean, I hope that we, like nothing obviously gets worse, but it always does get worse before it gets better. So we have to be realistic.
Well, I think I'm with you there. I was at the point where I was getting so sick of the political bickering and all the crap going on down here is way worse than you guys got it, right? And all of a sudden overnight it was like, okay, it all stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wait, what? And somebody said, he said, here's the deal. He said, 2 months ago everything was great. Right? People weren't complaining about the stock market. They weren't complaining about the schools. They're pitching about little inconsequential stuff. And we had these great, big, huge, heated debates about things that really aren't important. And all of a sudden, we got something really important to focus on, and that's what everybody's focused on now. And all the other stuff is kind of like, okay, yeah, you're cool. I don't have to hate you because you don't agree with me because we have a bigger problem to worry about.
Yeah.
So I think that was a good thing. It's bringing a lot of people together, and when everybody gets together, they'll figure something out. We'll get a handle on this. We always do. Like you said, human beings are pretty resilient, been around for a while. Right? And this is not the first time this has happened. Right? Mm-hmm. It hasn't happened in our lifetime, but it's happened. It's happened. You look at history, it happens all the time, right? It comes, people adapt, right? The whole concept of what happened to the North American Indians when the Spaniards showed up, they brought diphtheria, right? Boom, that was it. They had no immunity to it. They wiped them out. So they didn't need to bring an army. They killed all the people with disease. Right, so it's not the first time, right? I think technologically, I look at some of these things, and now we take a supercomputer, we feed it a DNA strand of a virus, and tell it to come up with the best antidote, and things like cranking about a dozen a day. Right, so we couldn't do this not even 20 years ago. It would have been impossible. We'd be talking about a 5 to 10 year cycle to develop a vaccine. Right, there's some group in Texas that literally they put it into the machine. 15 minutes later, they had their first candidate. Like, finally, we got something worthwhile out of those computers. Right? So I think we have a lot more technology to bring to bear, right? And the technology of like video conferencing, so people aren't isolated, right? There'd be people like you said, they're sitting in their apartment all by themselves with nothing but a telephone. Right, and it would be very isolating, and it would be very hard. Now they can get on Skype, they could call the kids, and talk to anybody they want to, and it's like not the same, but it's not as isolating as it would be.
For sure.
So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, we're definitely living in
I just
the
wish
best
that I'll
time.
read more.
Yeah, that's true too.
Right, read more.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, we're catching up on so many things. It's great.
It's great. But I guess to close off the interview, James, we'll just ask one final question related to fantasy and your writing career. So in one sentence, what's the most important thing that you hope to achieve in your writing career? Or if you want to break it down a little bit more, within the quarantine period, what do you most hope to achieve?
All I want is broad readership. How's that? I just want people to like it and read it and recommend it to their friends. That's really the whole goal.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing during this time of indefinite quarantine is broad readership. I mean, that can really happen during these times when people don't have anything else to do, so they turn back to the arts, to books, to music, to paintings that they want to look at. This is a great time for the arts, I think, even if it is a time of creative crisis.
Right, and fantasy is the kind of the thing you can get yourself lost in, because we were chatting about this the other day. I said sometimes I feel like I can feel the stress building, and what I'll do is I'll open up a manuscript and I'll start editing, and just get lost in the story, and then the stress goes away. Right, and half an hour later I'm fine. I'll bounce back. I can I get back to work, whatever's going on. Right, so that's an important thing is to have those kinds of stories that people can get sucked into and just. That's always been fantasy. You just want to get lost in the story and everything else kind of goes away, right? So now is a really good time to be putting those kinds of things out. We don't need the dark, horrible, dystopian future stuff. We want lighter stuff, and that's usually what happens when there's, like in a wartime, they tend to have a lot lighter fiction. Right? So now is a good time for the lighter stuff and the YA and kids especially, because they don't process quite the same way as adults do.
Right.
But they still feel the impact.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much once again, Mr. James Eggebeen, for coming on to the High Fantasy Podcast. It was great to have you back on. And when can your fans expect your YA release?
Good question. As soon as it's done. As soon as I find a publisher for it.
Wonderful.
Hopefully this summer.
Awesome.
Wonderful. And of course, we're going to include links to your various platforms and social media on this podcast.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, right on. We'll let you go, James. And it's been great. Please do take care, and all the best to you and your loved ones in this very, weird time. And we hope things work out with you still with your creative pursuits nonetheless. And we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, and take care, and we'll keep in touch then. And good luck with your work.
Okay, I gotta find my mouse button.
Oh.
That's it. All right.
All right, take care then.
Have a good day, sir. Check out the description of this video and you can see the different platforms we put our content on, as well as our social media links. Thanks again and see you next time.